perhaps a better understanding of what's actually happening and the timing involved might assist in the whole discussion.
Good. Carmen, hi. Would you like to come forward? And if you would like, Johnny Limbaugh is in the very far back. He's from the MPO, Metropolitan Organization. He's here today too. Johnny, you want to come forward a little bit? So in case I want to grab you, well, or somebody else may want to grab you. Because I'm sure not gonna. Come on forward. Hello, and thank you very much for coming here today. And Martha, this was your item, do you have any questions for Carmen, just to kind of lead this off?
Well, I mean, no, not
About the
really.
process?
Because I've been, calling MPO, FDOT, talking to Don Scott. Don Scott made a presentation at ABM. I mean, I pretty much understand the process. And from what, I can hear from residents and the effect of what a flyover would be, and what I've heard from council and what I've heard, well, particularly the mayor saying, that would be a worst case scenario. Let's get real. Flyovers are not included in PDE studies at Corkscrew and 41 or Corkscrew and Estero Parkway or, 41 and Estero Parkway and, Old 41 and 41. So, Immokalee Road, and 41. So I don't know why we have a flyover included in this study, the federal dollars, whatever, but I saw it in the budget, and I said, flyover at Old 41, well, let's look into this, and that's kind of how we got to this point. I know we keep saying, oh, well, there might be a flyover Phase 3 Bonita Beach Road, and that's come up for the last 6 years, but we never had a discussion at City Council, and I really think that there needs to be transparency for that kind of issue, since, the neighborhood that I've represented and Councilman Slatka represents would be dramatically affected if there were a flyover, and council, in a whole, has been a big proponent of economic development. It would just crush economic development at that corner, or restoration of development. So, my motion would be to just kill the study, because I understand you cannot take the flyover out of the study, and I have talked to Community Development Director in Fort Myers and Cape Coral, not the Community Development in Cape Coral, but I've talked to council members there, and they just said, you know what, nip it in the bud. And so I would make a motion to nip it in the bud and just cancel the study if we cannot take the flyover out of it. And I don't know if I have a second, but
Second.
I guess
There's
I
a
do.
motion and a second, and now the time for discussion. Since we have these professionals here, I'm going to ask a serious question. Since nobody else wants to ask a question, Johnny, could you come up for a minute? Councilman Simons mentioned that no other intersection has these kind of things proposed for them.
The long-range plan does show proposed what we term major intersection improvements, which include a flyover option at Gladiolus and 41. Colonial 41 obviously already has one. So there are other intersections along US 41 that potentially could have an overpass. So they are in the long-range plan, and they're lower on the priority list, as the city manager mentioned. This was moved up on the priority list. It was about 2007 when Southwest Florida Transportation Initiative, SWIFTY, brought forward an earmark request to actually look at 4 overpasses along the US 41 corridor. Unfortunately, at that time, the earmark didn't come back at the level of request. It actually came back at, I believe it was like $100,000. So actually, we gave that money to Lee County to do signal timing to add to the life of the intersections along US 41. So the PD&E study will look at all our alternatives at grade, overpass, and as they get through the process, the information, the data that's collected will allow the community to provide additional input, the city council, FDOT, the MPO board, and MPO staff to look at the facts. I think it's testimony to this board. You guys have never been afraid of the facts before. You let things go forward, you get the information, and then you make a decision based on fact. I think nipping the study in the bud at this point, this is for a long-term improvement to that intersection. It's not something that's happening within the next 5 years. The study itself will be a 2-year process at a minimum. It'll identify what type of intersection improvement. Do we need to go with triple lefts on a 6-lane roadway with triple lefts and all 4 quads? And you get a very wide footprint. There's the existing right-of-way that's there today is not enough to handle that type of at-grade improvement. So you'll have to buy right-of-way at some point to make the needed improvements. This PD&E will identify those right-of-way requirements. And it also gives the business out in all 4 quadrants the opportunity to have an understanding of what the future is bringing. There's no guarantee that those shopping centers, as they're developed today, 15, 20 years from now, when an improvement could be in place, will those shopping centers still be functioning with those same tenants, or will the city have come up with a redevelopment plan that incorporates the improvements at the US 41 Bonita intersection to have something that could be supported by the full county?
Let's just as I'm going to cover a couple of different things because there's been some assertions made, some little debates going on here and there, and some larger than others. So far as the need of an intersection, some people are like, let's just not do an intersection study. Does the intersection raise to the level to where, compared to other intersections, where FDOT, in a professional opinion, when somebody looks at that, it looks like there's a study that needs to be done? Has there been any determination of that? I mean, obviously, if it's been on since 2000, there has been some thought or recognition.
Actually, from my time when I was with the department back in 1990, when we did the PD&E studies for the US 41 6-laning improvements, the numbers at that time showed that there was a future improvement over and above what's out there today would be needed into the future, and that's carried on through the developments of all the long-range plans since that time. It was not included in the PD&E study at that time because it wasn't in the long-range plan for Lee County. The need was there. The numbers showed that it needed a major interchange improvement, but it was not that was not included in the PD&E studies for the 6-laning because it wasn't in the MPO plans. But since that point, it has been in each of the updates of the long-range transportation.
Now, the money that's used for this, I mean, I'm going to be preaching to the choir here, I think, at least the 3 of us. When it comes to this kind of thing, these SIS funds, these typical funds, at the MPO level, what we do, we not only compete with the different states, we compete with different districts, we compete with different municipalities, we compete with each other to get these funds that will be focused on these certain improvements. I mean, that's how this comes about, and some of them are federal, some of them are state funds. Is that correct?
Yes, I probably will defer to Carmen, but these are not SIS funds that are moving forward.
Right.
This is not an SIS facility,
Yeah.
so those funds wouldn't be there.
Carmen, where do these funds come from exactly?
Well, these that have been programmed to have Carmen Monroy, Florida Department of Transportation. So these funds that we're using are federal funds that have been allocated for the project. And so, yes, you're correct. They are prioritized, and there are a variety of needs. And as those needs are determined and made priorities, that's how these projects get funded.
Part of the PD&E process I've heard a lot of concerns from the citizenry about the merchants that are there. Is it part of the PD&E process? Does that take that in? Do they just ignore who's there, or do they take that into consideration? Or
The PD&E process is a very thorough process that takes into account a variety of factors, which include not only public participation and public comment on the process, but it looks at the factors on the environment and different factors that are all around, including the business community that's around. And of course, it requires a lot of interaction with the city council. As the information is developed, it comes back to you, and it comes back to the MPO so that you can process it and follow along and question it.
so let's say the city council says, well, we don't, forget it. We're not worried about the intersection. We like it the way it is. We don't want the study. What's FDOT's reaction possibly?
Well, the US 41 corridor is extremely important to our area, and so we look at it holistically, and we look at that. This is an identified priority that actually the City Council and the MPO has identified. And as Johnny pointed out, it's been in development since 2000, and as the population continues to grow, as you see additional economic activity in the area, that demand will grow. And the concern and always the danger in removing a study this early on in the process is that should the need then be determined that you need it, then you go back and you compete with a bunch of other projects and you are going through that prioritization process again, and that would result in an additional delay.
All right.
And Mayor?
Yes?
And, you know, if this is a long-range plan, then we can certainly go back and get another study. Without the flyover, I'm sorry that we committed to a federal process that required that we're going to potentially, it could potentially become a flyover. And I think the consensus on this council would come forward and say, and in this community would say, we do not want a flyover. It's a very visible intersection, different than Golden Gate, but I'm not going to get into particulars. I just call the question.
I'm sorry, I'm not going to recognize that question there.
I'm sorry.
We've brought these people from Fort Myers, these professionals here, and we will hear from them, and then you may do as you wish,
May I
Council.
ask my parliamentarian whether if I call the question must be called?
I didn't recognize her, so, is there any other questions for these
You
people
cannot not
before we go?
recognize me.
Yes.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Just clarify for me, if the study goes forward and a flyover is the ultimate recommendation, do we have the opportunity as a council and as a city to vote it down?
Let me be clear. It is very unlikely that the department would support any option that the city does not fully endorse, that the MPO does not feel is appropriate in a recommendation. And if I may clarify just one additional point. This study does not look specifically at a flyover. It looks at a variety of alternatives. And if I could just take that one step further, to remove any option from the table is problematic for the funding source, because long-term, any improvement that's needed there will require federal funding, which requires this type of study. It will require a look at all options, including a no-build option, because there are considerations, including financial, that evaluate what the preferred alternative solution is for that location. And that includes considering a variety of factors: financial, economic, looking at the growth and future impact of the area, looking at the US 41 corridor, looking at its relationship to other, transportation like infrastructure that we have, like I-75. It is a very comprehensive, holistic view of that intersection within the other infrastructure that we have.
Okay, so if I understand correctly, we cannot proceed with a process that says we'll buy into anything with the exception of a flyover.
Anything that the City Council would recommend to remove any option from consideration is problematic for the funding and the future funding of any improvement at that location.
Because as Martha has indicated, in my district, that's problematic, very problematic. So.
Okay, and
I'd
Janet,
like
did
to
you?
raise a point of order, please.
Janet, I'm going to recognize
Well, my
Janet. She
question-
was next
thank you.
on the queue.
My
I do
question
not
was-
want to stifle anybody's ability to ask a question here. Janet, go ahead.
My question was basically the same thing that Steve said, that I wanted to know when we had the ultimate findings of the study, who made the ultimate decision as to which way to go. So you had said that, obviously, that you would take our recommendations into consideration, but I'd like to see that part removed also, and I'd like to see it more of a concentration on the bicycle and pedestrian safety there. That's I'd like to see diverting all the attention to what a potential flyover could be to more attention on something that is a great problem and does need attention, would be the bicycle and safety part, which isn't necessarily traffic part.
Well, Actually, if I may provide a little more clarification as well, our secretary is heading up a statewide initiative looking at bicycle and pedestrian, and safety is paramount to all of the improvements that we do. It is the number one consideration that all of the improvements in our infrastructure. We are certainly much more focused on bicycle, pedestrian, transit, alternative options. All of those are taken into consideration. And throughout the process, because that study and the findings are brought periodically as often as the City Council would request, we bring those updates up to, we bring them up for discussion. Those considerations can be addressed specifically. It's all part of that comprehensive study.
Okay, are there any other questions before we go ahead?
I just have a comment.
Go ahead.
It's not shutting you down, really. This is just a comment. Peter, the mayor, and I sit on the MPO. I've never seen a question come before the MPO with studies from DOT or any of the other organizations that wasn't vetted clearly and cleanly by the citizens. So I don't think this is an end point. This is simply says this is a starting point for a study. Whether it's too expensive or not, that's not my call. But I can tell you, 20 years from now, we're going to be saying, what can we do at the intersection down there? And we need to at least have some professional advice as to what that is. That doesn't mean we have to take that advice. It simply means we have it. So, sorry to interrupt you.
Yes, Carl?
Mr. Mayor, if I might, I would like to ask a question. So my understanding is if the study went forward with all the options included, that would not be a problem for the funding source, correct?
We would
All the
make no
options.
predetermination as to the outcome of the study.
Correct. If the findings came out at the end and the recommendation was for a flyover, you've just indicated that if this community said, no, we don't want a flyover at that time, that you would not move the flyover option forward. Is that correct?
That's not what you said.
Well,
No.
I just want,
Easy?
You have a no-build alternative, and that would be what you could select as the alternative, as your preferred alternative.
because my question was going to be, well, if a flyover came up as number one and some other improvement came in as number two, if the city said no flyover at that time, would the option go to a no-build or to option number two?
Again, throughout the study, that is an opportunity. It would come back to the city council, and the city council would weigh heavily on that recommendation, and then it would have to be endorsed by the MPO. So there are a variety of opportunities. It is unlikely that the department would support anything that the city council and the MPO did not support.
Johnny, 1 second.
Can I just add my 2 cents at this point from my past experience in working with the department for a number of years in the southern 6 counties and seeing PD&E studies and alternatives coming forward where the local community didn't support. One instance that comes to mind is in Moorhaven for the new high-rise bridge. We presented one alternative. Actually, we presented 2 alternatives. The city council and the county selected option 3, which wasn't either of the 2 we were proposing at the time. And we actually built what they decided their community wanted at the time. So they went with one of the options that were carried forward. In a more recent case in Charlotte County, we were doing a PD&E study for the intersection of Zimmel and Burnstall Road for Charlotte County because they had received a federal earmark, and to use the federal funds required a full PD&E study. As we progressed through the study, the county commissioners decided they did not like the alternative that was going forward, and at that time selected the no build. At that time we terminated the study, and we didn't select, none of the preferred alternatives were selected. It was the no build alternative. So my point I'm trying to make is we're going to provide you the information all the way through, and the no build will always be on the table. So if we get to the end of the process, you don't like any of the options or the one we say is the preferred, you could select other ones, or we can go with the no build solutions.
Okay. I appreciate that. Any other questions before we go? Yes.
I do. Is Immokalee Road and Pine Ridge requested, are they part of this study?
Not
From
part of
Collier
this
County?
one.
Are they part of it at all?
No, sir.
For neither of those roads?
No, sir, this is focused on just that intersection.
And you're saying the federal funding is is the vehicle that's going to fund whatever happens on,
Typically, because these improvements are expensive, there is federal funding involved.
and how much of that is, how much of the total cost is coming from federal money?
Of this study, it
Yeah.
is
No.
all,
And now I'm talking about the whole project, if it was built, something was built.
well, we don't know what the preferred alternative is, so we don't have, it'll likely be federally funded, but we don't know.
But what are the assurances that the federal government will have the wherewithal to fund the magnitude of this particular, I mean, there's a lot of things that are present time today, and of course, the government doesn't have exactly a good financial track record, as we know, and, who knows what it'll be 5 years or 10 years down the roads.
Well, that transportation funding is prioritized by the MPO, and maybe Johnny wants to.
Right, and that's exactly, after the study comes up with a preferred or no-build alternative, if there's a preferred alternative, that then goes back to the MPO to select, to put on their priority list for the next phases, the design phase, a right-of-way phase, and ultimately a construction phase. So there's public involvement all the way through that process, and the MPO, the county as a whole, working as the MPO, gets to set the priorities for which transportation projects move forward to utilize the federal funds that are coming to Lee County.
I have one more question, Ben.
Sure.
Are you going to take care of the request that Martha had?
Absolutely.
Mayor?
Because that wasn't answered.
If I may, I can give an answer on that, and
On what?
on the Robert's Rules of Order, which is...
Well, we're going to go ahead and vote right now, so that'll take
Mayor,
care of
I'd like to, Councilwoman Martin is signaling something over there, and I'd like to make one comment.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, we do operate according to Robert Rules of Order, so I take exception to what just happened, but, okay. So, when I listened to the Technical Advisory Board and the Citizens Advisory Board on this Bonita Springs, Bonita Beach Road and US 41 intersection / flyover, all they discussed was a flyover. There were not discussions of other alternatives about at-grade. And my concern, and seems like the concern of some of the citizens on there, which I only heard one, and one of our staff members, I don't even know if I heard one of our citizens on there. I'm sorry. That there was, my concern was, we have a flyover built into this study. We haven't had, I wish you'd been here before we even pushed forward and we understood what this process was before we committed our city to get involved in it. Okay, so now it's sort of like going out and committing yourself to something and nobody knew it here of what the ramifications would be for us. I still think we should nip this in the bud, and I will call the question.
Okay, there's a.
I'm
the
sorry,
question-
I'm sorry, Councilwoman.
It's okay. I just had a
Don't mind me, I'm just sitting in the middle.
Sorry, sir.
had a comment.
Janet, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I did, and my comment is that ultimately, when we do get the results of that study, and you're saying that council does get to weigh in on it, and the residents do get to weigh in it, but my concern is that the other members of the MPO aren't Bonita folk. So they're going to be looking at this study as what it's going to do for them, and not necessarily what's best for here. And I don't know how and, where the scale's going to tip as to who gets more priority in the way that they vote for the project and all that. So I was just wondering if there was any way we're going to take a crapshoot with Martha amending her motion to go forward with the study, taking out the flyover possibility, and we'll just see what happens with the funding and try for it.
I think they just told us we can't take that out with these funds.
well.
So I hear you, and I'm all for you with the bicycle thing, because I think that's a right-on answer. So I remain with my motion. I'm sorry, ma'am.
Okay, there's a,
just wanted to ask.
and the motion is to request that the FDOT does not do the study.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
And send that information to
Okay.
MPO and FDOT.
All right, there's a motion and a second to request that the FDOT does not do a study for the intersection of Bonita Beach Road and 41.
Can you just clarify yes and no vote, the way it's worded?
Yes, and a yes vote would mean that you would sending a letter to the FDOT requesting that the study not occur, and a no vote would mean that the study would continue on.
And Mayor, that's for this study, okay?
Okay, does everyone understand the motion?
Yep.
Okay, and call the question, please.
Councilwoman Martin?
Yes.
Councilman Slackta?
Aye.
Mayor Nelson?
No.
Councilman Simmons? Councilwoman Simons?
Aye.
Councilman Lockhart?
Aye.
Councilman McIntosh?
No.
Okay, thank you very much. Could you stick around one second? We're gonna talk about something, we're gonna talk about cattails now, while you're here. It's like, those cattails. 13A, Martha, you had an item on there for 13A?
Oh, yeah. Last year, and thank you, ma'am, for being here. I really appreciate you coming all this way. FDOT has a pond in our neighborhood, in District 5, right adjacent to US 41. And back when that happened, I wasn't on council, but there was some assurance made by the former mayor and the council members that that pond would be well maintained because it was a beautiful wooded area, and we have a drainage retention pond there. And I think you heard our roadway landscape consultant that he drives past it all the time, and it could be lovely. So we budgeted $100,000 last year. I would hope that we can spend more of that on landscaping and maybe a little walkway or something. But I'd love to be able to work with your department and clean up that, maybe get some commitment from you to clean some of that up, maybe some maintenance, make sure that it's just not mowing around the edges. Because the neighborhood really needs some screening there from US 41 and a new commercial build that's gone on there. And just to make it an attractive asset, because it is an asset, but now we need to make it an attractive asset, because it's a very unattractive asset. So our council's budgeted. What, I asked our representative to South Florida Water Management District, Mr. Phil Flood, to shoot me an email yesterday, and one of his staff did send me an email saying they're all fine with it, and pulling out cattails, and if you want to get a modification on a permit for a little walkway or landscaping, they'll work with us, and that's all great, because I've kind of, Johnny and I have been talking for this about a couple of years when he used to work for FDOT. So hopefully, and I'm glad we're at this point where we can make a decision to move forward.
We can certainly work with staff and look at what's available within our resources to assist you. However, those cattails are native vegetation. They assist with maintaining the perimeter of that drainage. They serve a water quality function, and like they're seasonal. They grow during the summer rainy season and get quite tall, and then in the winter they kind of collapse. And so we can do what our maintenance is, and then we can work with staff to try and assist you. In the past, we entered into agreements with various municipalities for enhanced ongoing maintenance of that, but that's not something that a department typically funds.
Okay, so, I'd love to be able to see some of the water again and to be able to screen along there and maybe make it an amenity, because right now it's got this big black ugly fence. It looks like a prison camp, but I'd like to ask council if we release that $100,000 so we make it available to do something at that pond, and then I trust in your good judgment to carry forward and do something well. Chris Busk has offered his, help, and I ask that we do that. So if eradication totally of the cattails is not in order, whatever, but let's make it more attractive as we talked about in 2005 as a community, or
A couple
four.
of questions about retention areas. Do you think, retention areas, are they suitable for recreational purposes? There's been some mention about we can use
Boats?
it.
I don't think
We can
so.
use it for fishing and boating. Is that
That is
something that
likely
happens?
not an appropriate use of that. That is
Yeah, it doesn't
primary.
sound like one.
Right. The primary design was that to treat water runoff and to keep the roadway safe.
The water coming into there has all kinds of
Yucky.
Road
things
debris.
in it, right? Okay, so the other thing is the fence that goes around the area. Am I true in assuming that if FDOT owns the property, it's going to have a fence around it for liability purposes? Do you ever take the fences down and just allow people to just for visual, or what's the policy on that?
The fencing is a safety issue, and it depends on the slope of, that it was engineered to, so someone will have to look at that very closely.
Okay. All right, good deal. All right, but, and so Martha would ask that council authorize staff to work with the FDOT on some of these issues.
And Christian
She is-
Busk?
She is also asking that that $100,000 currently in the reserves in the budget be released pending council further action on what we want to do here.
Okay, and in other words, coming up with a plan so far as landscaping or whatever that might be along the edge there to further kind of obscure the view of that. But at the same time, we have to be careful to work with you to be sure it doesn't block your ability to get towards the wall.
Absolutely, and if removal of the cattails is a consideration, there has to be other vegetation that secures that perimeter, and there's engineering and there's permitting that has to be done.
Okay, all
Mayor?
right, that's a motion to.
Yes, and
release $100,000?
to ask if we can work with Christian Busk, because he's already on a roadway landscaping thing. The idea is to make sure that it looks like an asset in our neighborhood, and talking to Phil Flood, there are things I think we can all come together on that would make it an asset in the neighborhood. So that is a line item in our budget. The money was there reserved. So I hope that we can do that. Thank you, Mayor.
Second
Okay,
for
there's-
discussion only.
There's a motion and a second, go ahead.
You set out a reserves, she set out a line item on the budget.
It's a line item in the reserves, sorry.
Yeah,
Sorry about that.
In your
yeah,
face.
it was tricky, but we did it.
Well,
It was set aside for pond maintenance.
all right, that answers my question. Second.
Thank you,
Okay.
Mayor.
Thank you very much for coming today. There's a motion and a second. Any other discussion? Roll call, please.
Councilman Slakta?
Aye.
Mayor Nelson?
Aye?
Councilman Simmons?
Aye.
Councilwoman Simons?
Thank you, Mayor. Aye.
Okay.
Councilman Lockhart?
Aye.
Councilman McIntosh?
Aye.
Councilwoman